It was one of those cold, gray mornings in London where the drizzle clung to the air, making everything feel heavier. Emily adjusted her scarf and pulled her coat tighter as she hurried through the city streets, her mind already running through the day's to-do list. Work deadlines, an unread stack of emails, an awkward dinner with friends she hadn't seen in months. Each task weighed on her shoulders. She barely noticed the people around her, all wrapped up in their own invisible battles. A man in a business suit checked his watch obsessively, muttering under his breath. A woman clutched her toddler's hand tightly, her expression fraught with exhaustion. Everyone seemed to be carrying something. Emily reached the cafe where she worked, a small, cozy spot nestled between towering office buildings. She pushed the door open, the scent of freshly brewed coffee momentarily easing the tightness in her chest. "Morning, Em," called out Liam, the cafe's owner. "You okay?" "Yeah," she forced a smile. "Just tired." She wasn't just tired. She was exhausted, not just physically, but in a way that ran deeper, like a weariness in her bones. It wasn't just today. It had been months, maybe years of feeling like this, like she was never doing enough, never being enough. Her shifts at the cafe were predictable, the movements almost automatic. Pour coffee, take orders, smile. But her mind was elsewhere. She thought of the rejection emails piling up in her inbox, another company thanking her for her application, but ultimately going with someone more qualified. Qualified. The word stung. She had done everything right, gotten the degree, interned, networked. Yet, here she was, 29, single, barely making rent, and watching younger colleagues land jobs she had been chasing for years. By the time her break came, she sank into the corner booth, cradling her coffee. The familiar ache of self-doubt crept in. Maybe I'm just not good enough. As she scrolled aimlessly through her phone, something caught her eye. A book sat abandoned on the table next to her, the title, How to Be Enough by Hendriksen. Her fingers traced the cover. She wasn't the type to believe in signs, but something about those words made her pause. She glanced around. No one seemed to be looking for it. She flipped it open and read the first line. Perfectionism isn't about being perfect. It's about never feeling like you are enough. A lump formed in her throat. She knew this feeling, intimately. Emily's fingers tightened around the book as she reread the sentence. Never feeling like you are enough. The word struck something deep inside her, a quiet truth she had never been able to articulate. She hesitated before turning the page. It's just a book, she told herself, not some magical solution. But something about it felt different, like it had been waiting for her. The cafe bustled around her, but the sounds faded as she read, We are taught that our worth is tied to achievement, to perfection. But the truth is, no matter how much we do, it never feels like enough. Because the problem isn't our effort, it's the belief that we have to earn our right to exist. Emily exhaled sharply. She had spent her entire life chasing that feeling of being enough. As a kid, it was straight A's and gold stars. She had learned early that her value came from performance. Praise meant she was doing something right. If she wasn't being praised, she must be failing. As an adult, it was the job rejections, the Instagram perfect lives of others, the silent comparisons that whispered, You should be doing more. You should be someone else. She felt a prick of shame. Why does this feel so personal? Hey, what's that? Liam's voice broke into her thoughts. She looked up, startled. He slid into the seat across from her, wiping his hands on a towel. A book someone left behind, she murmured, closing it instinctively. Liam raised an eyebrow. Looks intense. What's it about? Emily hesitated, then sighed. I don't know. It's about feeling like you're never enough. Like no matter how hard you try, it's never good enough. Liam studied her, his expression softening. Sounds like something a lot of people could relate to. Emily let out a dry laugh. Yeah, Well, I think I just got called out by a book. Liam smirked. Books have a way of doing that. She glanced at the clock. 10 more minutes before her break ended. 10 more minutes before she had to push this all down again and pretend like everything was fine. Except she didn't want to. She wanted to understand why these words affected her so much. She wanted to know if there was a way out of this constant need to prove herself. With a deep breath, she opened the book again and turned to the page. What if I told you that you were already enough, that you didn't have to hustle for your worth? Would you believe me? Emily swallowed hard. She wasn't sure. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to try. The words echoed in Emily's mind long after she closed the book. You don't have to hustle for your worth. That was the part that stuck with her. She had spent years believing the opposite, that she needed to achieve, to prove herself, to be something before she could feel valuable. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. If she wasn't defined by what she accomplished, then who was she? Her break ended, and she slid the book into her bag, not quite ready to let it go. She returned behind the counter, where Liam was already taking orders. You good? He asked, glancing at her. Emily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about how many customers walked in every day with the same invisible weight she carried. How many people ordered their coffee with a polite smile, while secretly wondering if they were doing enough, being enough. As she worked through the afternoon, snippets of conversation floated to her ears. I don't know. I feel like I should be further along in life by now, a man muttered into his phone. She's got everything figured out, and I'm just stuck, a woman sighed to her friend. Emily wiped down the counter, her movement slowing. It's not just me, she realized. This wasn't some isolated problem she alone struggled with. It was everywhere, the quiet, unspoken belief that they all needed to be more, do more. By the time her shift ended, she felt drained but restless. Normally, she'd go home, collapse on her couch, and scroll through social media until she fell asleep. But tonight, something tugged at her. She needed air. Stuffing the book into her coat pocket, she stepped outside, where the city buzzed with life. Couples walked hand in hand, commuters hurried past, laughter spilled from a nearby pub. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts circling back to the book. The idea of being enough felt foreign, like trying on a coat that didn't quite fit. She had always believed that happiness would come after she got the right job, after she was in a stable relationship, after she became the version of herself she thought she was supposed to be. But what if she was allowed to be happy now? She found herself in front of a bookstore. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The smell of old pages and fresh ink wrapped around her, comforting in a way she hadn't expected. She wandered the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books. Then, as if by fate, she saw it. A fresh copy of How to Be Enough sat on a display table. She picked it up, feeling a strange sense of connection. She had stumbled upon it once. Maybe someone else needed to stumble upon it too. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the counter and bought a second copy. She wasn't sure why, but something told her this was only the beginning. Emily held the small paper bag containing the book as she stepped out of the bookstore. The weight of it felt significant, like she had just made a quiet promise to herself. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do with the extra copy, but something inside her whispered that it wasn't meant for her. As she walked, she thought about how strange the past few hours had been. She had started the day feeling like she was sinking, drowning in the pressure to be more. And now, she wasn't magically cured. The doubts were still there. The fear of not being enough still clung to her. But now, there was something else, too. A tiny crack in the belief she had held for so long. A small what if. What if she didn't have to earn her worth? What if she had been enough all along? She turned a corner and found herself in front of a small park. A handful of people sat on benches, lost in thought, or scrolling through their phones. Across from her, a girl, no older than 20, sat hunched over, her arms wrapped around herself. There was something about the way she sat, something familiar in the tension of her shoulders. Emily hesitated. She had no idea who this girl was, no idea if she needed the book or if she would even care. But then she thought about how she had found her copy, how she hadn't been looking for it, but it had found her anyway. Maybe this book was meant to find someone else now. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked over. The girl didn't notice her at first, too lost in whatever thoughts were weighing her down. "Hey," Emily said softly. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been fighting back tears. "I know this is random," Emily continued, holding out the book, "but I think you might need this." The girl blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What?" Emily smiled, a little awkwardly. "It helped me today. Maybe it'll help you too." For a long moment, the girl just stared at her, then at the book. Finally, with hesitant fingers, she took it. "Thank you," she whispered. Emily gave a small nod and turned to walk away, her heart pounding. She didn't know if the girl would read it. She didn't know if it would change anything. But she did know one thing. Today, for the first time in a long time, she had chosen to believe, just a little, that she was enough. And maybe that was a good place to start. As Emily walked away from the park, a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't dramatic, not some life-altering epiphany, but it was something, a small shift. She had spent so much of her life waiting for external validation, for someone else to tell her she was enough. But today, she had taken the tiniest step toward believing it herself. She wasn't sure what had pushed her to give the book to that girl. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe working in mysterious ways. Or maybe she was starting to understand that we all need reminders sometimes. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from her best friend, Claire. "Claire, hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Drinks this weekend?" Emily hesitated. She had been pulling away from her friends lately, making excuses, avoiding plans. Not because she didn't care, she did, but because she had convinced herself that she wasn't interesting enough, successful enough, worthy enough to show up. But wasn't that just another way of saying she didn't believe she was enough? She thought back to the book's words. What if you didn't have to earn your right to exist? Maybe it was time to stop waiting until she felt better, different, fixed. Maybe she just had to show up as she was. She typed out a response. "Emily, I'd love to. Let's do it." She hit send before she could overthink it. A light drizzle started again, the city's streetlights glowing against the wet pavement. As she walked home, she realized something else. The book hadn't magically solved her problems. She still had doubts. She still felt stuck. She still didn't have the perfect career or the perfect life. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward. Not because she had achieved something, but because she was finally beginning to believe that she didn't have to. That being herself, messy, uncertain, imperfect, was already enough, and that was a start. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling different, not in a my life has changed overnight way, but in a something is shifting way. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting herself just be for a moment. Normally, her first instinct was to grab her phone and scroll, checking emails, social media, job listings, looking for something to prove she was on the right path. Today, she didn't. She let herself exist without immediately trying to fix something. It was a small thing, but it mattered. By mid-morning, she was back at the cafe, tying her apron as Liam set up the espresso machine. "You look different," he said, eyeing her curiously. "Did you finally get a full night's sleep?" Emily smirked. Not really, but I did decide that maybe I don't suck as much as I thought I did. Liam laughed. Wow, that's some serious self-growth right there. She chuckled, but the truth was, she meant it. The usual self-doubt was still there, hovering in the background. But now, it wasn't the only voice in her head. The day moved quickly, customers coming and going, the hum of conversation filling the space. And then, just as Emily was wiping down the counter, she spotted something, or someone. The girl from the park. She stood near the entrance, clutching the book Emily had given her the night before. Their eyes met, and for a second the girl looked unsure. Then, slowly, she walked over. "Hey," she said softly. Emily set down the rag. "Hey." The girl hesitated, glancing down at the book in her hands. I started reading it." Emily's heart skipped. "Yeah?" The girl nodded. "I don't know, it was weird. It was like it was talking to me. Like every thought I've ever had about not being good enough was just right there, written out." Emily exhaled. "Yeah, I felt the same way." A pause. Then the girl gave a small, hesitant smile. "Thank you for giving it to me." Emily smiled back. "You are welcome." She wanted to say more, to tell the girl that she wasn't alone in feeling like this, that she wasn't broken just because she struggled. But somehow, she felt like the girl already knew. And maybe that was enough. As the girl left, Emily realized something. She had spent so much time looking for signs, proof that she was on the right path, validation that she was doing life correctly. But maybe the signs had always been there. Maybe they weren't grand, life-changing moments. Maybe they were small, subtle, like finding the right book at the right time, like saying yes to a friend instead of hiding away, like seeing someone else's pain and knowing exactly what they needed to hear. Maybe all this time she had been enough. And maybe she was finally starting to believe it. That evening, Emily sat on her small apartment balcony, a cup of tea warming her hands as the city stretched before her. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional sound of laughter drifting from the streets below. It all felt quieter than usual. Or maybe, for the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to slow down and actually listen. She thought about the girl from the cafe, the way her expression had shifted from hesitant to hopeful. Emily knew that feeling, that tiny flicker of recognition of maybe I'm not alone in this. She pulled her own copy of How to Be Enough from her bag and flipped to a random page. We chase perfection because we think it will bring us love, security, belonging. But what if those things were available to us, even in our imperfection? She exhaled. For years, she had believed that once she fixed herself, once she became the version of herself she was supposed to be, then she would be happy. Then she would be worthy. But what if she had been worthy all along? What if she didn't have to prove anything? The thought was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Claire. "Claire, can't wait for this weekend? Also, I was thinking, are you okay? You've been kind of distant lately. No pressure, just checking in." Emily stared at the screen. For so long, she had avoided questions like this. She didn't want to burden people with her feelings, didn't want to admit that she was struggling. But wasn't that part of the problem? She hesitated for only a moment before typing back. "Emily, honestly, I've been feeling kind of lost, like I'm never doing enough, never being enough, but I'm working on it." Claire's response came almost instantly. Claire. "Em, you've always been enough. You just never believed it, but I do." Emily felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected those words to hit her so hard. She had spent years convinced that people only liked her because she worked hard to be likable, that they only kept her around because she was useful, or pleasant or doing everything right. But Claire saw her, the real her, and she still stayed. Maybe it was time Emily started doing the same for herself. She set her phone down, letting the warmth of Claire's words sink in. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what she needed to fix. She was thinking about what she needed to accept, herself, as she was. And maybe that was enough. The weekend arrived faster than Emily expected, and before she knew it, she was standing outside the pub where she was meeting Claire. For a brief second, old habits kicked in. Do I look okay? Should I have worn something different? Will they notice I've been distant? But then she caught herself. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because she wanted to be. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The warm, familiar buzz of conversation wrapped around her. Claire waved her over from a corner booth, a wide grin on her face. Look who finally decided to be social. Emily laughed, sliding into the seat. Miracles happen. As the night went on, she found herself relaxing, really listening instead of being lost in her own self-doubt. The conversation flowed easily. Work stories, random inside jokes, Claire's newest dating disasters. For the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't overanalyzing every word she said. She wasn't worrying about being interesting enough, successful enough, or put together enough. She was just there, and it was enough. At one point, Claire nudged her. You seem different tonight. Emily tilted her head. Different how? Claire shrugged. Less in your head, more here. Emily smiled softly. Yeah, I think I'm finally getting tired of my own bullshit. Claire snorted. Took you long enough. They clinked their glasses together, laughter spilling between them. Later that night, as Emily walked home, she thought about what Claire had said. Less in your head, more here. How much of her life had she spent not being here, always worrying about what came next, about how she measured up, about whether she was enough? She didn't want to live like that anymore. She wasn't naive. She knew change wouldn't happen overnight. There would still be days when doubt crept in, when she felt like she was falling behind, when the old fears whispered in her ear. But now, she had something she didn't before. A choice. She could choose to believe that she was enough, even when she didn't feel like it. She could choose to show up for herself the way she showed up for others. She could choose to stop waiting to become something and start being herself. And for the first time, that actually felt like enough. The next morning, Emily woke up with a quiet sense of peace. Not the kind that came from everything being perfect, but the kind that came from acceptance. She stretched, rolled over, and glanced at her phone. No urgent emails, no crisis to fix, no overwhelming need to prove herself before she even got out of bed. It was strange how different things felt when she wasn't immediately chasing a sense of worth. She took her time making coffee, letting the warmth of the cup seep into her hands as she sat by the window. London was its usual gray, but today it didn't feel so heavy. As she sipped, she thought about what had changed. She still didn't have her dream job, still wasn't exactly where she wanted to be, but somehow, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was failing at life. Because maybe life wasn't something you win at. Maybe it was something you just live. Her phone buzzed. Another message, this time from an old university friend, Rachel. Rachel, hey, I know this is out of the blue, but I've been feeling kind of lost lately. Any chance you want to grab coffee and catch up? Emily stared at the screen. A few weeks ago, she might have hesitated. She would have overthought it, convinced herself she wasn't interesting enough to offer any real advice. But now? Now she knew that everyone felt like this at some point or another. Maybe that's why the book had found her when it did, so she could pass that message along. Emily, I'd love that. Let's do it. As she hit send, she smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just existing. She was connecting. She was living. And that was more than enough. A week later, Emily sat across from Rachel in a quiet cafe, their coffee cups between them. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the low hum of conversation filling the space. Rachel sighed, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. I don't know, Em, I just feel like I'm falling behind. Like everyone else has it figured out and I'm stuck. Emily smiled, a small, knowing smile. I get it, believe me. Rachel looked up. Yeah? Emily nodded. For the longest time, I thought I had to become something before I was allowed to feel good about myself. Like, if I wasn't successful enough, interesting enough, then what was I even doing? Rachel exhaled. Exactly. Emily hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out her copy of How to Be Enough. I want you to have this. Rachel blinked. Wait, isn't this the book you were talking about? Emily nodded, sliding it across the table. It found me when I needed it, and now I think it's supposed to find you. Rachel ran her fingers over the cover, her expression softening. Are you sure? Emily smiled. Yeah, I think I'm finally starting to believe it. Rachel studied her for a moment before smiling back. Okay, I'll read it. As they sat there sipping coffee, something settled in Emily's chest. A quiet certainty. She had spent so much time believing she had to prove her worth, always striving, always chasing. But now she saw things differently. She was already enough. Even on the messy days, even when she wasn't sure what came next, even when doubt still whispered in the back of her mind. She had been enough all along. And maybe, just maybe, the more she believed it, the more she could help others believe it too. With that thought, she leaned back in her chair, the warmth of her coffee in her hands, the warmth of something new in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting to be more. She was just being. And that was everything. If you've made it to the end of the story, I want you to take a deep breath. Because you are enough, right now, as you are. Without needing to achieve more, prove more, or be more. We live in a world that constantly tells us we have to hustle for our worth, that we need the perfect job, the perfect body, the perfect life before we can finally feel worthy. But the truth is, you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. Emily's story isn't just hers, it's ours. We've all had moments of doubt, of feeling like we're not doing enough, of wondering if we truly belong. But just like her, we can take small steps toward believing in ourselves, toward showing up, toward being instead of constantly chasing. So, if you've ever felt like you're falling behind, like you're not measuring up, let this be your reminder. You don't have to earn your worth. You already have it. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You already are. And you don't have to become something before you allow yourself to be happy. You are enough. Right now, today, always. So go out there and live, not for perfection, not for validation, but simply because you deserve to exist fully as you are. And that is more than enough.